He called her a disgrace to the family. But as soon as she appeared at the base, the old sergeant stood to attention and said, "General, ma'am." What happened next turned everything upside down. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching this video. The Holloway house in the northern suburbs of Atlanta looked exactly the same as it had the day she left. Trimmed hedges, a manicured lawn lined with garden stones her mother insisted gave it structure, and that same creaky screen door with a loose hinge her father never fixed. It swung open and slapped closed with a thud that still echoed somewhere inside her chest. Mavis May Hunter hadn't stepped foot near that porch in over 7 years, but tonight she would, because tonight they were celebrating someone else. The driveway was packed with late-model cars and SUVs, their polished chrome catching the last smolder of daylight. American flags hung from posts like banners from a forgotten battlefield, and from inside came the murmur of a dozen conversations, laughter, and the clinking of wine glasses. The Holloway family was hosting a dinner to honor the promotion of Captain Daniel Holloway, son of Colonel Archibald Holloway, retired. Her younger brother, the golden child, the one who made it. May had arrived alone, wearing pressed black slacks, a muted gray blouse, and a blazer she hadn't worn in years. Her hair was pinned back tight. No jewelry, no statement. Just silence and shadow. She stood at the curb for a long moment, watching silhouettes move behind the curtained windows, her fingers tightening around the old envelope in her bag. She wasn't here to reclaim anything. She wasn't here to make peace. She just needed to see them. When she finally reached the front door, nobody noticed. A neighbor passed by without a glance. 2 kids darted down the front steps chasing each other, brushing past her legs like she wasn't even there. She opened the door herself and stepped inside. The air was thick with food, cologne, and the echo of family pride. "May," her mother said, startled, setting down a tray of deviled eggs. "I didn't think—" "You didn't say you were coming." "I know," May replied. She offered no smile, no explanation. Her mother blinked and nodded once. "Well, come in then." The house was filled with people, most of whom barely remembered her or pretended not to. She saw some faces she recognized, old neighbors, former church friends, men in uniform with polished boots. The kind of crowd that made you feel out of place just for breathing differently. A digital projector hummed from the living room, cycling through images on a pulled-down screen. Daniel in fatigues. Daniel with his unit. Daniel shaking hands with someone from Central Command. A Lupin monument to someone else's journey. May stepped aside as a group of guests passed her in the hallway, laughing and sloshing red wine in their glasses. No one made room. She stood there, half in shadow, watching a woman she didn't know compliment her mother on how well she'd raised her boys. No mention of a daughter. Of course not. Her father appeared by the fireplace, tall and rigid despite the years. His buzz cut was thinner now, but his posture hadn't changed. Still, the man who could silence a room with a single glance. His eyes passed over her like fog through glass. "Colonel," someone greeted him. "Fine evening." He nodded. Good turnout for the captain. Daniel stood across the room encircled by admirers, looking every bit the image of confidence. His uniform was spotless, smile easy, voice clear. He caught her eye just once, then looked away. She didn't blame him. It was easier that way. There was no chair for her at the dinner table. It wasn't an oversight. Every plate had a name card. Every chair had a cushion. Her absence had been anticipated, maybe even hoped for. Her mother hesitated when May lingered at the edge of the dining room, then offered a weak suggestion. "There's a folding chair on the back porch if you'd rather." So May sat outside. The grill beside her hadn't been used in months. The propane tank hissed quietly with a slow leak she remembered reporting before she left. The patio light flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the wood planks. Inside, toasts were made, glasses raised. Daniel's voice carried over the laughter as he recounted a mission that earned him a commendation. She heard her father say, "He's everything we could have hoped for." She sipped warm water from a paper cup and listened to the world pretend she didn't exist. She wasn't angry. That emotion had dried out years ago. What remained was clarity. 7 years earlier, she had stood in front of a board of officers at Charleston Military Institute, facing an early exit from a career she hadn't just trained for. She had bled for it. During a live exercise, she had disobeyed a direct order because she saw something her commanding officer missed. 3 cadets heading straight into a kill zone. Her call pulled them back. It saved lives. It embarrassed her CO. The report was rewritten within hours. Her insubordination was documented. Her judgment was questioned. Her career ended. Her father backed the story without hesitation. "Discipline is what separates command from chaos," he told her. "You embarrassed the chain of command." She had packed her things that night without a word. No protest, no appeal, just silence. She didn't slam the door on the way out. That was her protest. The quiet. 3 weeks later, a private message arrived from a name that didn't exist. It directed her to an unmarked office in D.C., where she met a woman with clipped hair and no small talk. No badges, no ranks, no welcome. Just an NDA the length of a medical textbook and an opportunity. Join a civilian intelligence wing operating outside conventional military structures. She wouldn't wear a uniform. She wouldn't exist in databases. She wouldn't see her family again. She signed the paperwork without hesitation. The Orion Division wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud. It existed in the quiet between systems, the dark spaces between protocols. She spent her days parsing behavioral reports, monitoring threat patterns, identifying leaks that couldn't be traced through official channels. She learned to vanish, to watch, to endure. Her name faded from the world like breath on glass, and now here she was again, at the edge of it. When she returned inside to set her empty cup in the kitchen, someone handed her a stack of utensils without asking. Someone else requested more napkins. As always, she was invisible until useful. She complied without resistance, listening to Daniel tell a story about a base commander who had called him the most natural leader he'd seen in 20 years. She handed over the forks and drifted back to the porch. Later, when the applause had faded and the guests began to peel away, May stayed behind. She watched as the projector looped through the same 5 images. Daniel saluting. Daniel on the tarmac. Daniel shaking a general's hand. Her father stood near the mantel again, glass in hand, nodding at whatever praise floated his way. No one looked for her. Back at her apartment, May locked the door behind her and didn't turn on the lights. The room was neat, orderly, sterile, nothing fragile. She set down her bag, took off her blazer, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. Her shirt was wrinkled from the porch chair, her hair pulled too tightly, her face expressionless. She had looked this way once before, the night she left Charleston. Except now there was no anger, no ache, only the shape of someone who had finally adapted to being misfiled. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket, just once. Not a message, not a call, a coded signal from a hidden device in the lining. She pulled it out. The screen glowed for 2 seconds. Access flag, training node variant. Passive trigger, device, unknown. She stared at the blinking dot. Then she opened her desk drawer and pulled out an old binder. It was plain, military issue, worn at the edges. Inside was a hidden wafer drive, one of only 2. The other had been placed in a training manual she had gifted Daniel nearly a year ago, under the guise of helping him coach his team. She didn't know if he'd ever open it. Until now. The signal meant the drive had been connected to an unauthorized device, which meant Daniel had either opened it or someone else had. Worse, the activation ping wasn't standard. It had come from a legacy node, a retired data stream buried under layers of security. It shouldn't have lit up unless someone with clearance had touched it. Someone like her father. May closed the binder slowly. The air felt heavier. She stood by the window and watched headlights disappear down the street. Inside her pocket, the device blinked once more and fell silent. She didn't need to guess. Whatever she had locked away in that binder, Daniel had found it. And someone else was already listening. The morning haze settled over the Talladega training facility like a film of dust over an old battlefield. From a distance, the base looked as unimposing as it had for decades. Wide, sun-scorched concrete lots bordered by sparse trees, sand-worn barracks, and squat buildings humming with early electricity. But inside, the rhythm of drills had already begun, echoing through the compound in sharp cadence and boot strikes. May walked the half-mile from the civilian lot without speaking to anyone. Her ID badge clipped to the inside of her coat, barcode facing down. Her windbreaker flapped quietly in the breeze as she passed the outer fencing. The security at the perimeter gate barely looked up. Her name wasn't on any list, but the badge was real, and the scanner blinked green without protest. Orion had that kind of weight. Silent, invisible, and unquestioned. The bleachers were already half filled with family members of cadets, lower-ranking officers, and a few administrative observers sipping from thermoses. She took her seat on the second row, deliberately choosing a spot not too close to the edge, not too high to be noticed. A neutral position, eyes forward, arms folded. Down on the field, the unit began a movement-to-contact drill. Loud, basic, and mostly designed for demonstration. It was Daniel's team. She spotted him immediately. Posture perfect, uniform crisp, voice cutting across the space like a blade. He issued commands with confidence, correcting one cadet's footing, adjusting another's grip on a mock rifle. He was good. Maybe not flawless, but good. Better than she'd expected. May watched in silence, her expression flat. There was nothing in the drill that warranted official Orion reporting. No major errors, no structural failures. But she made a few notes regardless, some minor inefficiencies, a comms delay in the second squad, an overcorrection by the rear unit. Her pen moved slowly, rhythmically. Then the shift happened. From the opposite side of the field, a figure emerged from the group of supervising officers. Sergeant Randall Brooks. Older now, maybe in his late 50s, still built like a pillar of concrete. His gait was steady, his presence unmistakable. He moved through the formation like a hawk, eyes scanning the group until his gaze stopped dead center on her. He didn't blink, didn't nod, just stared. 1 beat, 2, 3, then he altered course. The movement was almost imperceptible at first, a small pivot of the heel, a narrowing of his shoulders, but he was coming, not toward the drill, toward the bleachers, toward her. Whispers began before he even crossed half the field. Cadets turned their heads. A few instructors paused mid-command. The ripple of confusion spread through the otherwise disciplined unit like a crack in glass. Brooks reached the bleachers and stopped 5 feet in front of her. He snapped to attention. "General," he said, his voice low and firm. "Ma'am, I wasn't informed you'd be observant today." Silence fell over the bleachers, the kind of silence that settles when something sacred is touched. A pause, too long to be comfortable. A breath no one wanted to take. May didn't move. She didn't flinch. She looked up calmly, met his eyes, and said, "At ease, Sergeant. I'm off duty. Carry on, and keep this quiet." He held her gaze for half a second longer, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." And just like that, he turned on his heel and returned to the field. Behind him, Daniel dropped his training rifle. It clattered onto the concrete, drawing a collective inhale from his unit. He didn't look at her, but he didn't need to. Everyone else already was. She stayed 10 minutes more. Then she stood. Her departure was unhurried. She walked the long path around the edge of the field, past the barracks, past the motor pool, and around the old obstacle course where cadets once failed and bled and learned. The air behind her was electric. She could feel it, not in the ground, but in the absence she left behind. A vacuum pulling attention into itself. By the time she reached the back gate, she had already opened the encrypted file on her private device. No field report was submitted. There was nothing in that drill worth mentioning. But what had just happened, Brooks's recognition, the dropped rifle, the ripple of unease, none of that would be forgotten. Not by that unit. Not by her brother. When she returned to her apartment, it was late afternoon. She didn't turn on the lights. The hum of traffic outside was distant, like noise from another life. She set her device on the table and stared at the blank document still waiting for her notes. Instead of typing, she opened her secure relay portal and traced the original access ping again. The drive had been activated from Daniel's tablet at 0416 hours, but the real problem wasn't the device. It was the route the signal took once it lit up. Instead of terminating at the drive's internal barrier, it had been mirrored, rerouted through an old node she hadn't seen active in over 6 years. An administrative folder with an obsolete signature, one name embedded deep in its metadata. Morgan Holloway. 442. Her father's training credential, long retired, long inactive. Or so she thought. May stared at the code. The data had been scrubbed, but not completely. Someone had tried to hide the trail, but left fingerprints behind. Amateur work, or deliberate. There was no way her father could have accessed that file without using cached credentials, or someone else triggering a dormant back door. The drive Daniel opened hadn't just contained a report. It contained a tripwire. The tripwire had pinged a system left behind by Curtis Vaughn, a civilian software architect who once designed training simulations and scrub tools for Orion. He had been brilliant and dangerous, so much so that he'd been quietly removed from the project, his clearance reassigned, his code buried. Except now that code had just resurfaced. May pulled up the logs again. The same access trail ended not at Daniel's tablet, but at a ghost server, an off-site relay node Vaughn had hidden in a legacy system. The moment Daniel's device connected to the wafer, the node lit up, copied the metadata, and forwarded it to an unknown vault. Someone else knew the file had been opened, and someone still had tools to track it. She closed the file and sat perfectly still. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It wasn't even just about her. The moment that drive activated, it alerted a system that had been waiting for years, watching, listening. She picked up her secure phone and opened a direct line to Orion Coordination HQ. It was nearly midnight, but the line answered on the first ring. "Authorization?" a voice asked. She entered the code. "Trace directive approved," came the reply. "Silent monitor. No incident file." No file meant no paper trail, no official record, just quiet eyes. She decrypted the outbound tag herself. Vaughn's signature was unmistakable. The structure, the formatting, the embedded failsafe all matched his style. He had left it there deliberately. The question wasn't whether Daniel had accessed the truth. The question was, who else had been waiting for him to do it? The next morning, she was already awake when her device buzzed again. An automated alert. Origin: Fort Talladega. Ping request: visitor log history. Requester: D. Holloway. Daniel had tried to confirm if it was really her. The request had been denied. Orion's override had blocked it before it even reached base administration. She wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. Later that evening, she drove out toward the civilian access lot, where she waited in the shadows of the tall lamp poles that lined the parking area. The sun had already dropped behind the trees. Her hands rested on the steering wheel. She wasn't sure he'd come, but he did. Daniel's boots echoed against the pavement as he approached her car. He was no longer in uniform, black windbreaker, standard-issue base boots, a stiffness in his posture that hadn't been there the day before. He didn't knock, he didn't ask. He just looked through the window like he was seeing someone he didn't quite recognize. She rolled it down. "I need to know what's going on," he said. "Not here," she replied. They walked in silence along the edge of the lot until they reached the maintenance shed, an old supply space long since unused. She unlocked the door with a general access tag and stepped inside. It smelled like dust, oil, and old metal. Daniel followed and closed the door behind him. "You gave me that binder," he said. "I did. You knew I'd open it. I hoped. You planted something. I left a door." He stared at her. And what was on the other side? May opened her slate and entered the access code. The screen lit up, displaying the fragment of the tripwire log and the flagged credential. She tilted it toward him. He read the name, the number. His jaw locked. "What is that?" "Dad's old clearance key," she said. "Used to alter a field report 7 years ago." He took a step back. "That's not possible." "It is." He wouldn't. He did. He turned away, hands on his hips, staring at the ground like it had betrayed him. "He always said you quit," he muttered, "that you cracked." "He needed me to look weak," she said, her voice low, so his version made sense. Daniel looked up slowly. "You let me think you failed." "They were going to think that anyway." He didn't reply. After a long silence, he whispered, "I thought you didn't care. I thought you just walked away." "I did," she said, "but not for the reasons you were told." He looked at her then, not as a stranger, not as an accusation, but as someone trying to reconcile two versions of the same memory. "All those years," he said quietly. "He used you as a warning, every time I stepped out of line." "Don't pull a Ree," he said. She didn't smile, but her lips twitched. "At least I was useful for something." He didn't laugh. She turned away, giving him space to breathe, to think, to come apart if he needed to. Then came the words that changed everything. "What do we do next?" It was the first time he'd said we. May handed him the slate. He held it like it weighed more than it should. He didn't look at her, just at the data, the signature, the timestamp, the betrayal etched into digital permanence. She didn't need to explain what it meant. He already knew. The silence inside the Orion facility was different from the silence on a military base. It was deliberate, engineered, and absolute. The building sat tucked into a nondescript office park in Northern Virginia, outwardly indistinguishable from any private sector logistics firm. Frosted glass panels, pale carpet, artificial greenery. But beyond the first two security doors, beyond the biometric checkpoint and the voice print confirmation, the world inside dropped its mask. The halls were cold, the lighting clinical, and the walls held no plaques, no emblems, no rank. May had been in rooms like this before. She had briefed in them, waited in them, and once in the early days had nearly collapsed in one after a 60-hour assignment cycle. But never like this, never with her brother beside her. Daniel sat to her left in a slim, hardback chair, his posture squared but his fingers twitching against his thigh. No uniform, no badge, just plain clothes and a government-issued tablet resting across his lap. His eyes were locked forward, unblinking. He hadn't spoken since they entered the room. 3 panelists sat across from them, 2 men and 1 woman. None wore rank insignia. Their clearances spoke for them. One of the men had gray at his temples and a mouth set in permanent skepticism. The woman held a stylus, but never used it. The third man, the youngest, kept watching Daniel like he hadn't decided what kind of threat he posed. May submitted the files with no ceremony. Original training report, unaltered timeline, the credential log from the triggered wafer, and the metadata trail leading to the unauthorized access. No one interrupted her. No one questioned her credentials. They knew who she was. When they looked at Daniel, the room shifted slightly, not in posture, but in weight. "You're his son," the gray-haired panelist said. "Colonel Morgan Holloway." "Yes, sir," Daniel replied evenly. "You understand what this could cost him?" "I understand what it already cost my sister." That was the only answer that mattered. They moved on. The session didn't build to a climax. It pressed inward. That was how these things worked. Not with shouting or gavel strikes, but with compression. By the time it ended, there was no ruling. Just a directive. The case had passed the threshold for procedural integrity violation. A full internal audit would be conducted. Parties involved were to remain off-record and off-base. No applause, no absolution, just the machine grinding forward. Outside, Daniel didn't speak for 3 blocks. Then he asked, "If they clear you, what does that change?" "Probably nothing," May answered. "You'd still do it again?" She didn't turn her head. "Wouldn't you?" He didn't reply, but his silence was not uncertain. It was resigned, or maybe resolved. They drove in silence. The city moved around them in the slow-motion pulse of late government traffic, sirens in the distance, muted horns, flashing construction signs. Daniel rolled down his window as they crossed the bridge, letting the air hit his face like he needed proof that the world was still real. The next morning, the message came. Same location, same room. This time there were 5 in the tribunal. 2 wore Orion pins. The others carried the weight of federal oversight in the cut of their suits and the severity of their glances. Colonel Morgan Holloway entered through the far door precisely on time. His collar was pressed, his boots were shined, his face unreadable. He gave his daughter one glance, then ignored her entirely. When his eyes landed on Daniel, they didn't linger. The chairwoman of the panel, a woman with a voice like cold steel, opened the session without formality. "Colonel Holloway, you are here to respond to evidence submitted in a procedural integrity case. The logs submitted confirm that your prior access credentials were used to modify a training report dated 7 years ago. Do you acknowledge the authenticity of the signature?" He glanced at the screen for less than a second. "Yes." No denial, no hesitation. "Were you ordered to make that modification?" "No, ma'am. It was a judgment call, mine." The panel exchanged no glances. The gray-haired man leaned forward. "Would you care to explain your reasoning?" "At the time," Holloway said, "I believed the original report would have undermined institutional trust. I corrected the record to preserve the integrity of the command structure." "You mean," the woman interrupted, "you misrepresented a cadet's actions in an official report." "I mean, I adjusted the narrative to reflect the greater necessity of order." The weight of his answer hung like smoke. Then Daniel stood. He wasn't prompted. He didn't ask. "My sister was that cadet," he said, voice steady. "I didn't know until 4 days ago. My father allowed that lie to become doctrine. It's been used to shape training culture ever since. I've read the original report. I've reviewed the logs. There's no question what happened. And there's no question what he did." Holloway didn't flinch. He didn't speak. To him, the moment was already over. The panelist asked one final question. "Colonel, do you object to reinstating the original report and clearing the modified version from all training databases?" "No," Holloway said, "I do not." The panel recessed. 15 minutes. May didn't leave her seat. When they returned, the chairwoman read the outcome without emphasis. "Effective immediately, Colonel Morgan Holloway is to be relieved of all remaining advisory duties and will transition into retirement without distinction. Officer Mavis Hunter's records will be amended to reflect her original field service, with all annotations cleared. This case will not be made public. No further action." That was it. No ceremony, no redemption arc, just facts laid bare. Holloway didn't look at either of them. He stood when dismissed and exited the room like he'd just completed a formality. No visible emotion, no hesitation. A statue being moved gently off a pedestal. Outside, the sun had dropped behind the perimeter wall. The security lighting hadn't yet switched on. The parking lot was draped in that pale, colorless gray that belongs only to government buildings and winter afternoons. Daniel walked beside her, his gait heavier than before. His shoulders bowed. "He really believes he did the right thing," he said. "Yeah," she answered. "That's what makes him dangerous." They didn't hug, didn't cry. They just stood in the stillness of something finally making sense. She reached into her pocket and unpinned her rank insignia. It had been with her since her commissioning ceremony, tucked away in a drawer for years. She held it in her palm for a moment, then closed her fingers around it like she was sealing something away. "I asked to be reassigned," Daniel said quietly. "Logistics, civilian integration team." She looked at him but said nothing. "They didn't fight it," he added. "Didn't even ask why." "They already knew," she said. They passed a group of cadets lining up for rotation drills. Daniel didn't look at them. Not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't. Not yet. Not without it twisting something inside him. By the memorial wall near the exit, he paused, sitting on the edge of the stone bench. "He didn't even blink," he said almost to himself. When they read the findings, it was like watching a piece of furniture being moved. "That's how he's always been," she said. "Stillness mistaken for strength." He looked down at his boots. "I trained to be him. Every step, every promotion." "You were chasing something real," she said. "You just didn't realize he wasn't it." He was quiet a long time. Then he asked, "Does it make me weak? That part of me still feels loyal to pieces of him?" "No," she said. "It makes you human." He pulled the rank pin from his pocket, looked at it. This meant everything to me. No, she said, it meant everything to who you thought you had to be. He handed it to her. I don't want it. Not now. She closed her hand around it. Didn't argue. They reached the edge of the base and stopped beside the waiting transport van. The driver didn't ask their names, just nodded. Daniel stepped up into the van. At the last second, he turned. I don't want to carry what he gave me. I want to build something better. May nodded once. That's the point. The door slid shut, the van pulled away. She didn't follow it with her eyes. Didn't watch the road. Instead, she opened her palm and looked at the insignia resting there. Then she closed her hand again, tucking it away like a final page turned. The next morning, a padded envelope arrived at her apartment. No return address. Just her last name written in Daniel's handwriting. Block letters, uneven. Inside was a polished silver badge. No rank, no name, no decoration, just weight. A sticky note was folded beneath it. Don't wear it, carry it. She set it on the table and walked away. She didn't need to hold it to feel what it meant. Hours later, a secure message arrived. Daniel again. He'd submitted a formal departmental transfer. No ceremony, no speech, no social post. Requested reassignment to Civilian Military Systems Oversight, the same branch she once served. It wasn't an apology. It was a step. 2 days later, he showed up outside the Orion building. Coat zipped, hair tied back, the same badge clipped inside the lining of his bag. They had coffee across the street. Nothing formal. No talk of the tribunal, just quiet conversation. Weather, coffee, silence. I'm not ready to forgive him, Daniel said, eyes on his cup. You don't have to, she said. He stirred the coffee but didn't drink. He raised me to believe duty meant never hesitating. Maybe, she said, nodding to the bag. This is the first time you actually honored it. He smiled, not wide, not performative, just enough to show something had shifted. Before he left, he stood beside her and opened his coat. The badge was pinned just inside. I don't want it to mean rank, he said. I want it to mean I saw what needed fixing, and I didn't look away. She nodded. Then you're already ahead of half the brass. He bumped her shoulder lightly. See you inside, he said. She watched him disappear into the building. Later that afternoon, she slid a note into his locker. One line, her handwriting tight and precise. If you ever forget who you are, start here. No signature. That night, she boarded a transport under a call sign nobody had used in years. No farewell, no orders, no recognition. Just her, a duffel bag, and a long runway lit by cold halogen lights. As the jet lifted into the pale sky, she looked down at the earth below. No headlines, no ceremony, no one watching. And that, she thought, was exactly the point. Not to be seen, not to be thanked, but to leave behind something that didn't exist until you stood for it. Then walk away before they remembered to clap. If this story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe for more. Check out the next video, and don't forget to share this one with someone who needs to hear it.